You wrote limiting beliefs in the comments. So many of you did. And I want to start by saying thank you, because that tells me something important about where you are in this journey. It tells me you already sense that something underneath the surface of your conscious effort is running a program you did not choose. And you are right. This conversation is specifically for you. I want to open with something that Dr. Bruce Lipton, one of the most important voices in the intersection of biology and consciousness, has been teaching for decades, and that still stops people completely when they truly absorb it for the first time. Approximately 95% of your daily life is not being created by your conscious mind. Let that land for a moment before we go any further. The decisions you make about money, the way you respond when a financial opportunity appears, the ceiling you keep returning to no matter how many times you try to break through it, the automatic, almost reflexive reactions you have to certain financial situations, the tightening, the hesitation, the self-sabotage that happens so fast you barely register it as a choice. None of that is primarily coming from the conscious, thinking, intentional part of your mind. It is coming from a program, a deeply embedded, extraordinarily efficient, almost unimaginably powerful subconscious program that was installed long before you had the cognitive capacity to evaluate it, question it, or choose whether you wanted it running your life. Here is the science behind that, because I think understanding the actual mechanism changes everything about how you approach this. Your mind operates in two fundamentally different modes. The conscious mind, the part you identify with as yourself, the part that sets intentions and makes deliberate choices and watches these videos and decides it wants a different financial reality, processes approximately 40 bits of data per second. That sounds like a reasonable amount until you understand what it is competing with. Your subconscious mind processes approximately 40 million bits of data per second. That is not a typo. 40 million versus 40. The subconscious is operating at a processing speed roughly 1 million times greater than the conscious mind. And while the conscious mind is creative, flexible, and capable of generating new thoughts and new directions, the subconscious is a pattern recognition and pattern reproduction system of almost incomprehensible efficiency. It does not create. It executes. It runs the programs it has been given with perfect, tireless, automatic consistency. And here is the piece that connects all of this directly to your financial life. According to Dr. Lipton's research, most people spend somewhere between 1 and 5% of their day in genuine conscious awareness, which means that somewhere between 95 and 99% of your daily experience, including the vast majority of your financial decisions, your behaviors around money, your automatic emotional responses to wealth and scarcity and opportunity, is being generated not by your conscious intentions, but by subconscious programming. Programming that, in most cases, was installed primarily before the age of 7. I remember the moment this landed for me with full clarity. I was years into my financial career, genuinely trying to build the kind of financial freedom I knew was possible, genuinely doing the conscious work of shifting my mindset and my strategy and my approach. And I kept hitting the same ceiling. Not dramatically, just consistently. A quiet, persistent return to the same financial baseline, no matter what I consciously decided to do differently. And when I encountered Dr. Lipton's framework for the first time, something clicked that had not clicked before. I was not failing to change because I lacked willpower or intelligence or the right strategy. I was failing to change because I was using a 40-bit processor to try to override a 40 million bit program. The math simply does not work. No amount of conscious effort, however sincere and however sustained, can reliably overpower a subconscious program operating at 1 million times the processing speed. That was not a discouraging realization. It was the most liberating thing I had ever understood about my own financial story, because it meant the problem was never me. It was the program. And programs, unlike character flaws or permanent limitations, can be changed. By the end of this conversation, I am going to share the specific understanding that finally allowed me to stop fighting my own subconscious programming, which never works, and start actually changing it, which does. But first, I want to make sure you understand exactly how that program was installed in the first place. Because once you see that mechanism clearly, the patterns that have been following you through your financial life are going to make a completely different kind of sense. If you are new here, hit subscribe and grab the free PDF on equal hours and their meanings linked in the description. Let's go deeper. So let's talk about how the program was installed, because this is the piece that, when you truly understand it, shifts something profound in how you relate to the patterns that have been following you through your financial life for years. Dr. Lipton describes the subconscious mind using a metaphor that I find both remarkably simple and extraordinarily precise. Think of it as a tape recorder, an extraordinarily sophisticated, extraordinarily powerful tape recorder nonetheless. Its job is not to evaluate or create or decide. Its job is to record what it experiences and then play that recording back, reliably and automatically, every time the relevant trigger appears. And here is the critical piece. The recording phase, the period during which the tape recorder is most actively capturing new programs, happens primarily in the first 7 years of life. During this period, the developing brain operates predominantly in a state called theta, a slow, highly receptive brainwave state that is almost identical to the hypnotic state. In theta, the brain is not filtering, evaluating, or critically assessing the information it receives. It is absorbing everything directly, completely, without resistance, and filing it as foundational truth, as simply the way things are. This is why children are such extraordinary learners in those early years. The theta state allows for rapid, deep absorption of enormous amounts of information about language, behavior, relationship, and reality. It is a genuinely brilliant biological design for equipping a new human being with the basic operating system they need to function in the world they have been born into. The problem is that the world children are born into is not always one where the adults around them have resolved their own relationship with money, with worthiness, with what is possible and what is not. And every repeated message, every emotionally charged experience, every observation of how the adults around them relate to financial reality gets absorbed into that theta state recording, not as one perspective among many, but as bedrock truth about how the world works and what is available to people like them. Think about what this means practically. If you grew up in a household where money was consistently talked about as scarce, as hard to come by, as something that required enormous sacrifice, and still never quite arrived in sufficient amounts, your subconscious recorded that as the fundamental nature of money, not as your parents' particular experience or your family's specific circumstances, as the truth about how money works for people like you. If you witnessed financial instability create fear, conflict, or a sense of fundamental unsafety in the adults around you, your subconscious recorded the association between financial expansion and danger, between having more and being at risk of losing it. If you absorbed messages, spoken or unspoken, that certain kinds of people get to have financial freedom and certain kinds do not, and that you belong to the latter category, your subconscious recorded that as a fact about yourself, a fact it has been faithfully confirming and reproducing ever since. None of this was your choice. None of it was a decision you made with any conscious awareness. It was simply what the tape recorder captured during the most receptive period of your development. And because the subconscious does not evaluate, it only executes, it has been playing that recording back every single day with perfect consistency in every financial situation that even remotely resembles the original programming. I want to share something honestly about my own financial programming here. During my years in the financial and insurance world, I carried a belief that I could not have articulated consciously at the time, but that was running in the background of virtually every significant financial decision I made. A belief that genuine financial freedom, the kind that comes with real autonomy, real choice, real freedom from the structures and systems and external authorities that tell you what you are worth, was not quite available to someone with my particular starting point. Not impossible, just slightly out of reach, like standing one step below a ledge you can see clearly but cannot quite pull yourself up onto. When I traced that belief back, genuinely, honestly, all the way back, I found it was not mine. It had been recorded during a period when I was absorbing the financial reality of the adults around me, most of whom had genuinely limited beliefs about what was financially possible for people in their circumstances. They were not teaching me limitation deliberately. They were simply living their own programmed reality, and I absorbed it as truth. And here is the thing that most people try at this point, the thing that feels logical, that feels like the right response to understanding this, but that almost never produces lasting change. They try to think their way out of it. They try to generate new conscious thoughts powerful enough to override the subconscious program. This is where the math becomes undeniable. You are attempting to use a 40-bit conscious processor to override a 40 million-bit subconscious program. And not just override it once, in a single moment of clarity. but override it consistently across the 95 to 99% of your day when the subconscious is running on autopilot and your conscious mind has drifted elsewhere. It is like standing in front of the tape recorder and ordering it repeatedly to play something different. However sincerely you ask, however forcefully you demand, the tape does not change, because you are not pressing the record button. You are just talking at a machine that does not respond to words. So why exactly does willpower almost never work against deeply rooted subconscious programming? And what actually does work, what pressing the record button actually looks like in practice? That is exactly where we are going next. So let's talk about why willpower almost never works, and what actually does. Because I think this is the most practically important piece of this entire conversation, and the one that most people in the personal development space never quite get specific enough about to be genuinely useful. The reason willpower fails against deeply rooted subconscious programming is not a character flaw. It is not a spiritual deficiency. It is a processing power problem. And once you understand it clearly, the repeated failure of sheer conscious effort to produce lasting change stops feeling like personal inadequacy and starts feeling like what it actually is, the entirely predictable outcome of bringing the wrong tool to the job. Here is the specific dynamic that Dr. Lipton describes. Your conscious and subconscious minds can operate simultaneously, but they cannot both be fully in control at the same time. When your conscious mind is genuinely focused, present, and engaged, it can direct your behavior. But the moment your conscious attention drifts, and it drifts constantly because the conscious mind is not designed for sustained, uninterrupted focus across an entire day, the subconscious immediately resumes control, and it resumes not from where you left off in your new intentions, but from the program it has been running all along. This is why people can have a powerful realization, make a genuine commitment to change, feel absolutely certain in a moment of clarity that something has shifted, and then find themselves, days or weeks later, back in the exact same behavioral patterns. The conscious mind had a real experience of change. The subconscious simply waited, with infinite patience and zero judgment, for the conscious mind's attention to drift. And then it resumed playing the tape. Think about what this means for affirmations. When you repeat an affirmation, I am financially abundant. Money flows to me easily. I am worthy of wealth. You are engaging your conscious mind in the generation of a new thought. And that conscious thought carries real energy. It is not meaningless. But it is being generated by a 40-bit processor for the fraction of the day when your conscious mind is actually present and focused, in direct competition with a 40 million-bit program that is running the rest of the time. The affirmation is genuinely trying. The math is simply not in its favor. This does not mean affirmations are worthless. It means they are insufficient on their own, and that understanding why they are insufficient points directly toward what actually works instead. What actually works is finding a way to access the subconscious directly, to get below the level of conscious thought and into the recording layer, the theta state where the original programs were installed, and introduce new information at that level, rather than trying to override the program from the outside. Dr. Lipton identifies several pathways to this. The most direct and most widely accessible is the hypnagogic state, that threshold between waking and sleeping that we explored in earlier conversations on this channel. In that state, the brainwaves naturally slow toward theta. The critical faculty of the conscious mind relaxes its filtering function, and the subconscious becomes genuinely receptive to new input in a way it simply is not during ordinary waking consciousness. This is why the practice of inhabiting a new emotional and financial identity in those moments before sleep, which I have talked about in depth in previous videos, is not just a nice spiritual concept. It is a neurologically grounded method for accessing the recording layer of the subconscious directly. There is also something that Dr. Lipton calls energy psychology, a broad category of approaches that create what he describes as a super-learning state in the brain, similar to the theta receptivity of early childhood, allowing new beliefs to be installed at the subconscious level far more rapidly than repetition alone could ever achieve. The specifics of these approaches vary and go beyond what I can cover fully in this conversation, but the principle behind all of them is the same. You are not trying to overpower the old program from the outside. You are finding a way to access the recording function and introduce a new program from the inside. But here is the piece I want to make sure lands clearly, because I think it is the most immediately practical thing I can offer you from this entire framework. Before any technique, before any method, before any approach to reprogramming, there is something that changes everything about how effectively any of those approaches work. and that is awareness. Specifically, the ability to catch the program running in real time. This is what changed most profoundly for me when I genuinely absorbed Dr. Lipton's framework. I stopped experiencing my automatic financial reactions as simply the way things were, as my natural, inevitable response to certain situations, and started recognizing them as programs, as recordings playing back, as the tape running, not as my authentic self in the present moment, but as a pattern installed decades ago in a completely different context by people who were doing their best with their own limited programming. And that recognition, however simple it sounds, is itself a form of pressing the record button. Because in the moment you observe the program, rather than simply running it, you have stepped into the 5%. You are in your conscious mind, watching the subconscious execute, rather than being unconsciously carried along by it. And from that position of conscious observation, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Not an immediate override. The program does not disappear the moment you notice it, but a choice. A genuine, real-time choice about whether to follow the old recording or to deliberately generate a different response. I want to give you a very specific example of what this has looked like in my own financial life. There is a particular kind of financial opportunity, one that involves genuine visibility, genuine commitment, genuine skin in the game, that used to trigger an almost immediate internal contraction in me. A very fast, very automatic movement toward caution, toward minimizing, toward finding the reasons it was not quite the right time or the right situation. It happened so quickly and felt so natural that for years I experienced it simply as good judgment, as being appropriately careful. When I started applying Dr. Lipton's framework, I began to recognize that contraction for what it actually was. A program. A recording installed during a period when expansion had felt dangerous, when visibility had carried risk, when the adults around me had consistently modeled caution as the only financially responsible response to opportunity. It was not my wisdom speaking. It was their fear recorded in my theta state and playing back decades later as though it were my own instinct. And the moment I could see it clearly, the moment I could say, in real time, that is the program, not me. Something shifted in what came next. Not always perfectly, not without resistance, but with a quality of conscious choice that simply had not been available when I was running on autopilot. Now, I want to add one more layer to this before we move into the final part of our conversation. Something from Dr. Lipton's work that I find both scientifically fascinating and deeply practically relevant to everything we talk about on this channel. Your thoughts are not contained in your head. When a nerve carries a signal, it functions like an electrical wire, and electrical activity generates a measurable magnetic field that extends beyond the boundaries of your body. The technology to measure this already exists. Your brain's electromagnetic field can be detected outside your skull, which means that the programs your subconscious is running, the beliefs, the emotional patterns, the financial identity you are broadcasting moment to moment, are not private internal experiences. They are fields of energy extending outward into your environment, influencing the people and situations around you in ways that are subtle but measurable and real. This is not mysticism. This is the science behind why the people and circumstances that show up in your financial life so consistently match the internal program you are running. You are not attracting them metaphorically. You are, in a genuinely physical sense, broadcasting a signal, and that signal influences what and who responds. Which means that changing the program is not just an internal personal development project. It is the most direct and most powerful form of external financial change available to you. Because when the signal changes, everything that responds to the signal changes with it. And that brings us to the most practical question of all. How do you actually begin? How do you start the process of identifying and changing the specific programs that are running your financial life right now? That is exactly where we are headed. So here is where everything we have covered today becomes something you can actually begin working with, not someday, not after more preparation, but starting from the moment this conversation ends. I want to open this final part by saying something directly to anyone who is feeling a little overwhelmed right now, because I know this framework can land heavily at first. The idea that 95% of your financial life has been running on a program you did not consciously choose, installed before you were old enough to evaluate it, being broadcast as an electromagnetic field that influences everything around you, that is a lot to absorb. And it can initially feel like one more thing that is wrong, one more layer of work that needs to be done before anything can really change. I want to offer a completely different frame for it. This is not bad news. This is the most liberating information you will ever encounter about why your financial life looks the way it does. Because it means the patterns that have been frustrating you, the ceiling you keep returning to, the self-sabotage that happens faster than conscious thought, the gap between what you want and what you keep creating, none of that is a reflection of your worth, your intelligence, your spiritual development, or your capacity for abundance. It is a program, and programs can be changed. So where do you actually start? Because I think the most honest and most useful thing I can offer you here is not a 10-step system or a perfectly structured protocol. It is the specific starting point that has made the most difference in my own financial reprogramming, and the one that I believe is available to absolutely anyone, regardless of where they are in their journey. You start with observation. Not judgment, not fixing, not immediately trying to overwrite everything you discover. Just honest, curious, genuinely compassionate observation of the programs as they run. Here is what this looks like in practice. For the next week, I want to invite you to become a gentle observer of your own automatic financial responses. Not the deliberate, conscious decisions you make when you are fully present and intentional, but the fast, automatic, almost reflexive reactions that happen before your conscious mind has fully engaged. The tightening when an unexpected expense appears. The immediate internal no when an opportunity involves financial risk. The way your body responds when someone talks about significant wealth, does it open or contract? Does it feel like possibility or like something slightly out of reach for someone like you? These automatic responses are the programs running, and your only job in this first phase is to notice them, to catch them in the act, to say as neutrally and as compassionately as you can, there's the program, rather than either following it blindly or fighting it forcefully. Because here is what I have found, consistently in my own practice and in the experience of people I have worked with. The moment you can observe a program rather than simply run it, something fundamental shifts. You are no longer inside the tape. You are watching it play. And from that position, from that small but crucial distance between the program and your conscious awareness of it, genuine choice becomes possible in a way it simply was not before. From observation, the next step is what I would call deliberate re-entry. This is where the practices we have talked about in other videos on this channel become most powerful. The hypnagogic state before sleep, where the subconscious is naturally most receptive, becomes a deliberate programming window. Instead of drifting into sleep carrying the emotional residue of the old program, you consciously introduce the feeling, the identity, the emotional signature of the new one. Not as an affirmation performed by the conscious mind, but as a genuinely felt, genuinely embodied experience inhabited in the theta state where new programs can actually take root. The breathwork practice we talked about in our last video becomes relevant here too. Because the parasympathetic state that breathwork creates is itself a form of theta access, a genuine relaxation of the conscious mind's filtering function that allows the subconscious to become more receptive to new input. Combining breathwork with deliberate visualization of your new financial identity is not just a nice morning routine. It is a neurologically grounded approach to pressing the record button. And the financial identity work we have explored across this entire channel, the personality shift from Dispenza, the living from the end from Neville, the releasing of the inherited program from Hellinger, the thermostat reset, all of it now sits within a single coherent framework. Every one of those practices is, in Dr. Lipton's language, a way of accessing the recording layer of the subconscious and introducing new programming at the level where it can actually take hold. I want to close with something personal. When I first encountered this framework, when I genuinely understood for the first time that the financial patterns I had been fighting for years were not character flaws or destiny, but programs installed before I could evaluate them, I felt something I did not expect. Relief. Not the superficial relief of finding an excuse, the deep relief of finally understanding the actual mechanism, of seeing clearly and completely why the conscious effort alone had never been quite enough, of recognizing that the program could be changed, not by fighting it, not by overpowering it with sheer willpower, but by learning to access the layer where it lived and introducing something new. That relief was the beginning of genuine change, not because understanding alone changes the program, it does not, but because understanding removes the shame and the confusion and the exhausting sense that something must be fundamentally wrong with you. And from that clearer, more compassionate, more accurate understanding of what is actually happening, the real work, the observation, the deliberate re-entry, the consistent practice of inhabiting a new identity at the subconscious level becomes not just possible but genuinely compelling. You are not broken. You are programmed. And there is a profound difference between those two things. One is permanent. The other can be changed. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video. This one felt important, and I hope it gave you not just information, but a genuinely different way of seeing your own financial story. If this resonated, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs it. You never know whose financial story you might help reframe with a single conversation. The books that have shaped my journey are all linked in the description below. And the free PDF on equal hours and their meanings is there too. Grab yours if you have not already. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.